The party was winding down at the Beverly Hills Hotel in October 1962. It was one of those industry gatherings where everyone pretended to like each other, while secretly calculating who could help their career and who was no longer worth the effort. The usual Hollywood ritual. Dean Martin was standing near the piano, half listening to a producer tell a story he'd heard 3 times before, when he felt a presence at his shoulder. Not just any presence, a weight, a gravity that made the air itself feel heavier. He turned and found himself face to face with Marlon Brando. Brando was 38 years old and already a legend. The Godfather was still a decade away, but he'd already revolutionized acting with a streetcar named Desire on the waterfront and a string of performances that had redefined what was possible on screen. He was the high priest of method acting, the man who'd proven that film performance could be art of the highest order. He was also, by all accounts, insufferable. Brando had a habit of treating social gatherings like philosophical seminars, cornering people for intense conversations about truth and meaning and the nature of performance. Most people found it exhausting. Some found it intimidating. A few, the ones who'd had too much to drink, found it pretentious. Dean found it mildly amusing. "Dean Martin," Brando said, making the name sound like a question rather than a greeting. "That's what they tell me," Dean replied, swirling the ice in his glass. "I've been watching you all evening. I'm flattered. Usually people have to pay for that privilege." Brando didn't smile. His eyes, those famous penetrating eyes that seemed to see through every facade, were fixed on Dean with unsettling intensity. "You fascinate me," Brando said. "I get that a lot. Usually from women, though. I'm being serious. So am I. Women find me very fascinating." Brando stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've spent my entire career trying to understand the nature of authentic performance, what it means to be real on camera, to strip away the artifice and reveal the human being underneath." Dean took a sip of his drink. "Sounds exhausting." "It is. It's the most exhausting thing in the world, but it's also the only thing that matters." Brando paused. "And then there's you." "What about me?" "You don't do any of it. The emotional preparation, the character work, the searching for truth. You just show up, say your lines, and go home. And somehow—" Brando shook his head, as if the phenomenon genuinely puzzled him. "Somehow it works. People love you. Critics praise you. You've built an entire career on doing the exact opposite of everything I believe in." Dean smiled his lazy smile. "Maybe I'm just naturally talented. That's not it. I've seen naturally talented people. They still have to work. They still have to dig. But you—" Brando's voice took on an edge. "You're not real, Dean. Nothing about you is real. The drunk act, the cool persona, the effortless charm. It's all manufactured, calculated. You're the most artificial performer I've ever seen." The words hung in the air between them. A few nearby conversations faltered as people sensed the tension. This was Marlon Brando, the greatest actor of his generation, telling Dean Martin, to his face, that he was a fraud. Dean's expression didn't change. He took another sip of his drink, seemingly unbothered. "You might be right," he said. Brando blinked. He'd expected defensiveness, anger, maybe even a fight. He hadn't expected agreement. "I might be right?" "Sure. The drunk act is an act. The cool persona is a persona. I've been manufacturing Dean Martin for 30 years. Dean shrugged. "So what?" "So what?" Brando repeated, incredulous. "So everything. Art is about truth. Performance is about revealing the authentic self. If everything you do is manufactured, then nothing you do has any value." "According to who?" According to the fundamental principles of acting, of art, of human expression." Dean was quiet for a moment, studying Brando with an expression that was harder to read than his usual lazy amusement. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more serious. "Can I ask you something, Marlon?" "Of course." "When you're playing a character, doing all that emotional preparation, searching for truth, whatever, Who decides what's true? Brando frowned. What do you mean? I mean, how do you know when you've found it? The authentic emotion, the real feeling. How do you know it's real and not just another performance? Because I feel it. Genuinely feel it. When I'm playing Stanley Kowalski or Terry Malloy, I'm not pretending to be them. I am them. And what happens to Marlon Brando while you're being them? He steps aside. The character takes over. Dean nodded slowly. So Marlon Brando disappears, and Stanley Kowalski appears. And you call that authentic? Yes. But Stanley Kowalski isn't real. He's a character Tennessee Williams made up. So you're erasing something real, yourself, to become something fictional. And you call that truth? Brando opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The question had caught him off guard. It wasn't the kind of thing people usually said to him. Most people either worshipped his method or dismissed it. Nobody ever questioned its fundamental logic. That's different, Brando said finally. The character is a vessel for expressing universal human truths. Through Stanley Kowalski, I reveal things about desire and violence and vulnerability that are true for everyone. And through Dean Martin, I reveal things about loneliness and fear and the need to be loved. The character is different. The function is the same. But you're not feeling those things. You're just performing them. Dean smiled slightly. How do you know what I'm feeling? Brando was silent. Here's the thing, Marlon, Dean continued. You think there's a difference between real emotion and performed emotion. But what if there isn't? What if all emotion is performance to some degree? What if the guy who cries at his mother's funeral is performing grief, and the guy who stays stoic is also performing grief, just a different version? That's nihilistic. No, it's honest. We're all performing all the time. The question isn't whether the performance is real. It's whether it connects, whether it makes people feel something. Dean paused. Your performances connect. Mine do too. We just use different methods to get there. Brando was quiet for a long moment. The party noise swirled around them, but they were in their own bubble now, two men engaged in a conversation that neither had expected. You're more intelligent than you let on, Brando said finally. Another performance, Dean admitted. The dumb singer routine. People expect less from you that way. It's easier. Why would you want people to expect less from you? Because when you exceed low expectations, people are delighted. When you fail to meet high expectations, they're disappointed. I'd rather delight than disappoint. Brando shook his head. That's the most cynical philosophy I've ever heard. Is it? I think it's practical. I think it's how you survive in an industry that chews people up. Dean finished his drink and set the glass on a nearby table. You want truth, Marlon? Here's truth. I'm a kid from Steubenville, Ohio, who figured out that people would love me if I pretended to be someone else. So I've been pretending for 30 years. And you know what? It worked. I have money, fame, respect. I've made millions of people happy. But are you happy? The question landed like a punch. Dean's expression flickered, just for a moment, revealing something beneath the mask. Then the lazy smile returned. I'm content. That's more than most people can say. Content isn't happy. No, but it's enough. Brando studied him for a long moment. He'd come into this conversation certain of his own superiority, certain that his commitment to truth and authenticity made him a better artist, a better person, than performers like Dean Martin who traded in surfaces and illusions. Now he wasn't so sure. Can I ask you one more thing? Brando said. You can ask. The mask you wear, the Dean Martin character, does it ever come off? Is there anyone who sees the real you? Dean was quiet for a long moment. The question seemed to require more consideration than the others. There used to be, he said finally. My kids, when they were young. My mother, before she passed. A few friends who knew me before all this. He gestured vaguely at the party, at Hollywood, at everything. But as the years go by, the mask gets harder to remove. You wear it so long that it fuses to your face, and eventually you forget what's underneath. That sounds lonely. It is. Dean's voice was barely above a whisper. It's the loneliest thing in the world. But it's the price of the ticket. You want fame. You want love from strangers. You pay with intimacy. With being known. He looked at Brando with something that might have been compassion. You pay the same price, Marlon. You just don't know it yet. All those characters you disappear into, all that authentic emotion you summon, it costs something. And one day you'll realize that you've given so much of yourself to fictional people that there's nothing left for the real ones. Brando felt a chill run down his spine. The words hit too close to home. His marriages had failed. His relationships with his children were strained. He'd sacrificed everything on the altar of his art. And what did he have to show for it? Critical acclaim, awards, and an apartment full of scripts and emptiness. We're not so different after all, Dean said quietly. We both perform. We both hide. We just use different masks. The conversation ended there. Someone interrupted to pull Brando away for photographs, and when he looked back, Dean had disappeared into the crowd, probably already on his way home to watch old westerns alone in his den. But Brando didn't forget that conversation. Not that night. Not that year. Not ever. Over the decades that followed, as his career reached its apex with The Godfather and then slowly declined, Brando often thought about what Dean Martin had said, about masks fusing to faces, about the price of the ticket, about the loneliness that came with being loved by strangers and unknown by everyone who mattered. He watched Dean's career from a distance, the television show, the films, the Rat Pack reunions. He saw the same lazy smile, the same effortless charm, the same performance that never seemed to waver. And he wondered what was underneath, what it cost Dean to maintain that mask day after day, year after year, and he wondered increasingly what it was costing him. In 1994, a journalist asked Marlon Brando about acting technique. The conversation turned to different approaches, method acting versus classical training, emotional truth versus technical proficiency. And somehow, Dean Martin's name came up. Dean Martin, Brando said, his voice distant and thoughtful. I met him once at a party in 1962. I told him he wasn't real, that everything about him was manufactured. What did he say? He agreed, and then he asked me something that I've never been able to answer. What was the question? Brando was quiet for a long moment, his famous eyes looking inward at a memory decades old. He asked me how I knew the difference between authentic emotion and performed emotion. He suggested that maybe there wasn't a difference, that all emotion is performance to some degree, that the question isn't whether something is real, but whether it connects. And what did you conclude? Brando smiled sadly. I concluded that he was right, and I was wrong. I'd spent my entire career chasing some idea of truth, some notion of authentic emotion, and all I'd done was exhaust myself. Dean Martin just showed up, did his job and went home. And he connected with millions of people, made them happy, made them feel less alone. He paused. I made people feel things too. But I don't think I ever made anyone happy. Not the way he did. Not the way a song like That's Amore can make someone happy on their worst day. Do you regret your approach? I regret that I was so arrogant about it, so certain that my way was the only way. Dean Martin showed me that there are many paths to the same destination. He just took a path I didn't understand. The journalist pressed further. If you could go back to that conversation in 1962, what would you say to him? Brando thought about it for a long moment. I'd say thank you. Thank you for challenging me. Thank you for making me question my assumptions, and I'd say... His voice caught slightly. I'd say that I hope you found peace. I hope the mask came off eventually. I hope someone got to see the real you before the end. By the time that interview was published, Dean Martin was already dead. He'd passed away on Christmas Day 1995, alone in his Beverly Hills home, surrounded by the silence he'd both craved and feared. Brando read the obituaries. He saw the tributes, the songs, the film clips, the testimonials from people whose lives Dean had touched. And he thought about what Dean had said about masks fusing to faces, about forgetting what was underneath. Had Dean Martin ever found peace? Had anyone seen the real man behind the persona? Brando didn't know. He would never know. The conversation they'd had in 1962 was the only real exchange they'd ever shared. Two men, briefly honest with each other, before retreating back into their respective performances. But that conversation had changed something in Brando. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, over years. It had planted a seed of doubt in his certainty about truth and authenticity. It had made him question whether his relentless pursuit of emotional honesty was really about art, or whether it was just another mask. More sophisticated than Dean's, but a mask nonetheless. In his final years, Brando became increasingly reclusive. He stopped caring about his career, about his image, about all the things that had once seemed so important. He spent his time on his island in Tahiti, eating and reading and watching the ocean. Some people said he'd given up, that he'd lost his passion for his craft. But maybe he'd just finally understood what Dean Martin had been trying to tell him. The performance doesn't have to be exhausting. The pursuit of truth doesn't have to destroy you. Sometimes it's okay to just show up, do your job, and go home. Sometimes the mask is necessary for survival. Sometimes contentment is enough. Marlon Brando died in 2004, 9 years after Dean Martin. In his final interview, he was asked about his greatest regret. "I spent too much time searching for something that might not exist," he said. "Authentic emotion, pure truth, the real self beneath the performance. I sacrificed relationships, happiness, peace of mind, all in pursuit of an ideal that kept receding the closer I got to it. And if you could do it over?" Brando smiled. A tired, peaceful smile that looked nothing like his famous sneer. "I'd be more like Dean Martin. I'd show up, do my job, make people happy, and go home. I'd stop torturing myself in the name of art. I'd accept that the mask and the face might be the same thing, and that's okay." He paused. "Dean told me once that contentment was enough. I didn't believe him then. I thought he was settling. But now, at the end of everything, I think he was the wisest man I ever met. He understood something I spent my whole life trying to learn." What was that? That the performance isn't separate from the person, that we're all characters in our own stories, and that the best we can do is play our roles with grace and make peace with the fact that we might never know who's really underneath. Brando closed his eyes. Dean Martin knew that. He'd made peace with it. And I think in the end, that's what real wisdom looks like. Not the pursuit of truth, but the acceptance that truth might be unknowable, and the courage to keep living anyway. Two men met at a party in 1962. One was the greatest actor of his generation, obsessed with truth and authenticity. The other was a crooner who'd turned performance into an art form. One challenged the other. The other responded with a question that had no answer. And 40 years later, at the end of their lives, they'd arrived at the same place. The mask is the face. The performance is the person. And the only truth that matters is whether you made people feel less alone. Dean Martin understood this from the beginning. Marlon Brando had to learn it the hard way. But in the end, they both got there. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for.